I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and I'm going to talk about stuff that's going on now, and it's kind of getting into my favorite time of the year. I'm not a big sight fisherman, and I usually can't wait till the spawn gets over with, because then them fish start moving out to where they're going to be most of the summer. I like to structure fish. I love to flip. Right now, our water conditions are perfect. You know, we've got 3.5, 4 feet high water in the bushes, stained water. A lot of the fish are getting done spawning, so instead of talking about what we've been talking about for weeks and weeks, you know, Ned rigs, shaky heads, which will all catch fish, and they will all year long. And if anybody's got any questions on anything, don't be afraid to, you know, ask me while we're talking about that instead of saving it for later. But I'm going to get into deals like how I fish today, what I'm going to do tomorrow. And with this water up, even in the real clear water, these fish will get in the bushes. It's amazing sometimes you'll be able to see the bottom of a willow tree or a buckbrush, flip a jig in there, then all of a sudden just see a flash, you know. If you got a little bit of wind and stuff, you know, it makes it a lot better. But a couple of my main baits, and normally I'm going to, you know, I'm using 20-pound Sunline shooter. Whether I'm fishing gin clear water or dirty water, sometimes I'll go up to 25. But I'm usually going to match my color of the jig by the water that I'm fishing. And I'm going to throw 2 different baits. You know, we make jigs, but probably one of my favorite baits is a beaver or a beaver type bait. This particular bait is a Strike King structure bug. But I'll throw a Reaction Renovations Sweet Beaver, Strike King Rodent. But normally on it, I'm always going to peg my weight. You know, this particular rig, I've got a bobber stopper. If I'm going to peg it, I actually ran out of them, so I bought some over here. You can buy these little rubber pegs. Peg it, slide it up inside the bullet weight. Trim it off. That way if you've got to retie, you can just slide your weight up. And normally on the hook, I'm going to use a 4/0 heavy duty flipping hook. Now if I go to a smaller, like the, I don't know what Reaction Renovation calls it, but it's the smaller beaver. And in the Rage Bug, they also make a small one. If I go to the smaller bait, I'll throw a 3/0. Now the size weight, you know, usually I'll go between a 1/4 ounce and a 3/8. And one of the reasons I peg it all the time is I want the bait to go down into the bush. A lot of times, if you don't peg it, your weight will get hung up in the branch. Or I mean, your bait will get hung up in the branch and the weight will go down to the bottom where you want the bait. So that's the reason I peg it in thick cover. If I was fishing open water, I probably wouldn't peg it at all. I'd just Texas rig it. And you know, a lot of times I'll go to a heavy one, a 1/2 ounce, not so much to get it through the thicker stuff, just for a faster fall to get a reaction strike. You know, a lot of times you want to throw as light a weight as you can so it's more natural for the fish. But sometimes they just want something that's zooming by so they don't have to think about it, you know. And most of the time when I flip in there, I'm just going to let it go to the bottom of the bush, you know, pump it a couple times, nothing there, pick it up and flip it into the next bush or the next tree. You know, and right now there's so many bushes in the water, you want to look for some bushes that are a little bit different. Maybe some that are out a little bit deeper in front of the other ones, or some that are even really shallow, but something that's a little bit more isolated. Maybe it's by a little point or a little depth change. I seem to do better on that type of structure than just taking a 1/4 mile of bank and fishing all the same bushes. Now I'll just fish a straight line till I figure out where, if I get 2 bites and they were on the same type deal, maybe there was a little swing or a little point, then the next bank I go to, instead of fishing the whole bank, I'm just going to try to look for those places that are like where I just caught those fish. You know, 1 fish might be a fluke, but 2 you're starting to put a pattern together. And I'll mix it up between the beaver and a jig. Now we've got 2 different jigs. We've got a heavy cover jig that Brian Snowden designed, and then we've got a finesse style jig that Bobby Albert designed. To me, the finesse, now I've fished with Bobby, and he can throw this finesse jig any place I throw the heavy cover jig and not get it stuck. Myself, I tend to get the finesse jig stuck a little bit more. The reason being is the finesse jig has got a little softer weed guard. To me, it's my favorite bait for flipping docks. It comes through the brush and the rock real well. But for the heavy buckbrush, like what we got in the water right now, table rock, and up at Stockton, when you get that buckbrush and stuff in the water, that weed guard's a little too soft. When you roll over a limb, it tends to bend down. So the heavy cover one works a little bit better. And if you notice, it's almost like a Texas rig. It's a, you know, pyramid style hook, real flat bottom. So if you're skipping the bait, underneath docks, underneath walkways, you can get 5 or 6 skips out of it, and really comes through the cover good. Brian worked on this for about 1.5 years. We'll fish it in the submerged cedar trees, and it's also a really good swimming jig. Now, a lot of times, I'll swim a jig as much as I'll pitch it and work it through the cover. And what'll kind of give me a clue on that a lot of times, if I'm reeling up to make another cast and I get a bite or I see a fish following it, sometimes I'll pick up a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, but I'd rather swim the jig because, I mean, chatterbait works great in open water, but around laydown stuff, it tends to roll over and you get hung up a lot. Spinnerbait can work real good, but if you're fluttering the spinnerbait in and out of the bushes, you'll be constantly back there getting it unhung. The jig will come through the cover so much better than a spinnerbait. And if I see that a lot of times, you know, it depends on the watercolor. I'll throw white a lot. And I'll usually, if I'm swimming it, I want at least a 1/2 ounce. And I'll use like a Ultra Vibe Speed Craw, a twin tail trailer, or a single swim bait. And you know what's good about this is the jig you can cast all the way back into where it just about hits the bank and swim it out to a bush or lay down, let it drop for a second, just kind of let it yo-yo, where the spinnerbait and chatterbait you'll get it stuck. If you feel like you gotta flip it right through the heart of the cover, you can do that with the jig. Usually for swimming a jig, my 2 favorite colors are either white or black and blue. And you know what's kind of crazy, I usually don't go to black and blue till the water's brown, like it is some places. But we sell a lot of jigs in Table Rock and Bull Shoals area. The #1 selling color is black and blue. That's something that I probably miss out on, that I don't throw enough, is black and blue in clear water. See, I always think black and blue is really dirty water. But I think, you know, a guy can fish black and blue in just about all water conditions. Depending on the watercolor, like I say, if it's real dirty, I'll go black and blue. Another one, color I like to throw a lot is it's a Magic Craw. You know, right now you got a lot of bluegill starting to move up in there, in the bushes, in around the docks. It's got a lot of blue highlight in it. It's got some brown in it. And Brian kind of came up with this color because he travels all over the country fishing the Bassmaster Elites, and instead of carrying 1 million jigs, 1 million different colors, this is probably his #1 jig, regardless if he's in Alabama or California, up on the East Coast. It's usually what he starts out with when he's practicing to find fish. Now, besides throwing the jig and the beaver style bait in the bushes, it's a really good time. If a guy likes to fish real slow, is throwing a Wacky Rig in there. This is one that I think it's called a Nico rig that Big Bite Baits makes, and it's got an O-ring poured into it. And a lot of times what I'll do, I'll take a 1/16 ounce Ned rig. Now they got hooks inside. The owner makes a Wacky Rig worm hook. This is a 5-fish, Ned jig head that we make. But a lot of times you like a little bit of weight, and the reason I like the weight is so I can throw it on 15, 17 pound line when I'm fishing in them bushes with a bait caster. And between the weight of the bait and the head, you got enough weight to cast it, flip it, and it'll sink down into the bushes. But even though a lot of the fish are done spawning, there's still some that are spawning. So this still, for the next 2-3 weeks, there's still gonna be fish that'll come up in them bushes, bury up in there. And a lot of times you can tell when it's a spawning fish too. I mean, Some of the bites I had the other day, a lot of them, you don't feel the bite, all of a sudden your line's just swimming off. But a lot of times, you'll get a bite, set the hook, fish won't take it. If you flip right back in there, he bites it again, that's usually a fish on a bed that you just can't see, especially in that dirty water. And you can usually catch that fish if he'll bite once and show to you where he's at. You can keep pitching in there, and a lot of times you might have to change baits, but you can usually catch that fish. Some other baits I like to throw too is, and to me these are all beaver style baits, but big bite baits, and it's a Craw tube. It's like a tube with legs, works real good. And this one here, it's got a single flapper. You can also use these baits as a trailer on a jig. And you know, one thing I didn't talk about when I was talking about the jig is what I use for a trailer. Depending on the action that I like, water's cold, I like something that's not moving a whole lot, almost like a critter craw, or this is a crocagator. Makes a good little ring craw that I like to use. A little bit smaller size, but now where that water's a lot warmer, I like a plastic chunk or something that's got a lot of action in the legs. Zoom Speed Craw to me is probably one of the best trailers. It'll work all times of the year. It's got real good swimming action. I want something that when it's falling, the legs are moving a lot, or if I'm swimming it's got a lot of leg action to it. And you know, like I say, right now there's pretty much color all over the lake if you get back in the creeks. The main lake from Kimberling City down to the dam's pretty clear, but you get up into Long Creek, and even in the back of Indian Creeks, Big and Little Indian and Baxter's got awesome color, Kings River, James River. Like I was saying, this time of year I like when them fish are done spawning and they start moving back out. Now for about a month, going to have a shad spawn in the next couple weeks. And what them shad are doing, first couple hours of the morning, they're going to be spawning and laying their eggs. And what they do is they lay their eggs. Some days when I take the boat out, they'll be on the back of my boat. Eggs be all over the engine, the back of the boat, but they lay their eggs on styrofoam, trees, so you know they don't get up on the bank. And you can usually tell when the shad spawn's going on because you'll see shad inside of boat dock slips, the water be boiling. And that's usually when the water gets around 68, 70 degrees, you see that happening. And by that time, most of the fish are done spawning. And I feel like when them fish get done spawning for a couple weeks, they just kind of go out over deep water, and they don't go deep, they just suspend. They'll stay 12, 15 foot deep, kind of rest up, and that's about the time the shad spawn is happening. And I love it when they get out there because you get a cloudy, overcast day, a day like we had yesterday, and you catch topwater fish all day long. If you can't catch them on top, you can take a swim bait, and this is the time of year I'll start going, you know, bigger swim baits instead of like the 2.8s, the 3.2s. I'll go to a 3.8, even a 4.8. And I'll throw them on 2 or 3 different heads. This one here is endorsed by Greg Vinson. I think it's Fish Head makes it. And what I like about it, it's got a, see, I can't even get that keeper off. It's got a dual wire keeper, holds the bait on real good. Now I've messed up my bait, it's not going to be any good, but you know, a lot of times once you get a bite or two on these, they're only good for like one fish, you know, because they start sliding up and down. But I really like that head there. It's got a big meat hook, it's got a good hook in it. Another head I like to use is a Scrounger Head, and I've used a bunch of these. This one here is a Picasso, I don't even know how to say it, but it's the one that Aaron Martin, then Pulse makes one. Now Jim had me, when he was over there at Sportsman, he'd get a lot of these stuff. He'd have me test a lot of these. The problem we had with a lot of the Scrounger heads is you'd reel them too fast and the bait would roll. And what that does, it makes a disaster out of your line. You know, it'll just twist it up really bad. But these are 2, and Lucky Strike makes one as well, that I've had really good luck with not twisting the line. And normally what I'll use on these, instead of using a paddle tail, I don't like to use a paddle tail when I've got a scrounger head, because I feel like the scrounger head's doing all the action up front, and I feel the paddle tail works against it. So what I like to do is use a straight tail. This is where I'll usually use a Magnum fluke, or like a 5-inch caffeine shad. This is one that I just took off my fluke rod, but I'll usually take that caffeine shad and put it behind it. And I'll just figure out how deep them fish are and try to keep that bait in that zone. And it's just like fishing a swim bait, or Alabama rig, just slow and steady. And they'll bite it just like an Alabama rig. Sometimes it'll be boom, boom. And it's hard not to set the hook. Just got to keep reeling until the fish loads up. But like I say, that's starting to happen now, and it's going to be a good deal for the next, 4 to 6 weeks. Like I say, I think there's still a lot of fish that are spawning. Now my topwater baits, right now I'm finding, to me a whopper plopper is a good fall bait. Or anytime they're biting a buzz bait, I think a whopper plopper is good. Right now my topwater baits, or my topwater bite, I'm having the fish really slow. Now I had this fluke rigged up here. This is my follow-up right now. I've got it rigged up with a 5/0 hook. I put a little weight in it, so I help cast it. I throw it on 12 or 14 pound line. And what I mean by a backup is if I get a fish that'll show himself, that'll roll on a redfin or blow up but won't eat it, I'll reel that rod up and throw that fluke right up on top of that, where that fish come up. 90% of the time I can catch them right now. The fish they're kind of lethargic. I mean, they're coming up and they're not crushing the bait, but they're slapping at it. If they do that, like I say, I'll pick a fluke up. But for years we've thrown the cotton cordell redfin, jointed redfin. Storm makes one, it's called a jointed thunderstick, and they all work good, but we've had to make different modifications to them as far as to make them run good. The redfins, it would take about 5 of them to get one that would have good action and run good. This one that Berkley makes, and I'm in no way sponsored by Berkley or whatever, it just flat works good right out of the package. It's got good hooks. The cotton cordell ones would have to change the hooks. The Storm one would heat the bill up, bend it down. This has got a little weight up front. What a lot of guys used to do on a cotton cordell one is add weight to it, so it would keep a good walk to it. Another trick to these things, if you're getting fish short striking it, try a feathered hook on the back. It's the same with like a popar or any kind of bait that the fish don't seem to be eating, especially in clear water. Try a feathered hook. That seems to be just sometimes a little bit of a deal that'll help make the fish, eat the bait. Naturally the topwater bite is better in the clear water. And I think as long as it doesn't get too crazy with the rain, we should have a really good topwater season. The water is, yes.
Go ahead. Do you prefer the split tail or this one that's solid?
I throw both. To me, the split tail is kind of a no-brainer, and I use it for guiding a lot because it's just easy. You just reel it. Sometimes the straight ones, you got to twitch your rod tip a little bit. It's like a walking bait. Someone that doesn't fish a spook very much, my favorite is a spook. I love to throw a spook style bait. Strike King Sexy Dog, I like it. It's a bigger bait. They gotta make a little one and they make the bigger one. I guess a middle size, because now they make a real big one too. But I like the bait that's got 3 hooks. Like most spooks only got 2 hooks. This is one that Spro is making. It's a prototype, and it looks real similar to like a Sammy, but it's probably one of the easiest walking baits. A Zara spook, you got to have a knack to walking it. To me, the Strike King Sexy Dog and this one here by Spro is really easy to learn how to walk. Now, if you are fishing spooks, one thing I would do is put split rings on the hooks. The old spooks got like I call it a little cleat. 2 little screws, it's got the hook in there. What happens is the hooks get in a bind. So what I would do is I'd cut the hook off, put a split ring in that little cleat, and then put new number 2 hooks on there. What happens, I think a lot of times, is that fish gets the bait wedged in a certain way, and the hook comes out, especially if they're slapping at the bait. But if you use an old Spooks, you know, put a little split ring in there. And you know, years ago we even tried those, like the dropped Spooks. I don't know if you remember them. They had a hole in the middle, and you'd put like a little crappie bait or something on the back, so when the fish missed the bait, you just give it line and the little drop deal would work. I never had too much luck with them because to me it impaired the action of the bait. It's the same with the feather. I don't have as good a luck on a walking bait as I do with the redfin. You know, another bait that'll work good too is like a Strike King, if you can find them, is the it's like a king shad, or I forget the name, but they're really hard to find, but they work real good too. You know, then fish start getting out there on structure. I'm not a big shaky head guy. I mean, I'll throw a Ned rig or a split shot or something like that right now. I just, even though our company is making finesse shaky heads, I just don't like to throw them that much. But I will throw, and starting this time of year, we've got a Magnum shaky head that Brian and I have been fishing for a couple years. We just started making them. Any place you're throwing a football jig, and it doesn't matter whose football jig it is, they don't come through the rock and the brush real well. Just the design of the head. What we'll throw a lot is we'll take this flipping jig, and we've got them in 3/4 ounce. I'll use it, a lot of places I'll use a football jig, or I'll use this shaky head. Anytime you want to throw a big bait, like a 10-inch worm, instead of Texas rigging it, you know, try putting it on this Magnum shaky head. It's got a 6/0 hook. And one of the things about when we started making the shaky heads, I wanted that little center wire on there. I hate these shaky heads that don't have that, because the worms being slimy, I can't hardly get the dang thing started on there. So I wanted that so I could go, you know, straight in the center of the worm and then screw it on there. You just pass that around if you want. But the design of that really comes through the rock and the brush, and it'll stand up. And I'll use that on a 10-inch worm, Magnum lizard, you know, big craw. You know, right now the Okeechobee Crawl is kind of hard to be. I mean, it works good in clear water. It'll work really good in the stained water too. It's got a lot of flash on it, you know, with the blue. This one is Renovations. I think it's called Blue Swirl. It's got a little green pumpkin and blue in it. Water's real dirty. I will go with like a black and blue or a black neon. But, you know, day in and day, a California 420 is a real good one in clear water and dirty water, as long as it's not too dirty where the fish can't see it. I think in order to get them fish to bite in that dirty water, they either got to be able to hear it or see it. And I think that's a lot of the reason I like the flappy craws. Them craws in a ring style bait like this, whether it's a worm or a beaver, it gives off a little bit of vibration and noise as it's falling in the water. And you know, like all of our jigs, if a guy likes rattles, they've got a place right underneath the skirt where you can insert rattles if you think rattle is the key. I'm not real big on them because I don't ever find that our water usually gets that dirty that we need rattles. Some guys like rattles in clear water. It's just all, if you think it works, you need to be putting rattles in there. You know, but fishing, a lot of it's right between our ears. You know, if you think you got to do something a certain way and you got more confidence in it, that's how you need to be fishing, or fishing your baits. Now down in the clear water right now, you know, when them fish backing out, I'll throw a tube a lot. And I noticed up here they've got a lot of their own heads. They're a house brand. I'll just take like a 1/4 ounce or 5/16 ball-headed jig, stuff it up inside a tube, poke the eyelet out, and, you know, fish this out on the gravel. The same place that we're fishing a couple weeks ago for these spawning fish, but these fish are starting to move out there a little deeper. And even in that clear water, before we got all this rain, you know, the visibility was 15, 18 foot, and those fish will bed out there that deep. And now with the water coming up another 3 foot, I mean, that's putting them out there at 15, 20 foot. And a lot of them fish that are done spawning, especially the smallmouth, are already starting to move back out there. Because I noticed a lot of the smallmouth we've been catching here lately have been long and lean, you know, and they're done spawning. and starting to move out a little bit deeper water and feed up a little bit. I've kind of been stuck in that for the last 2-3 weeks in that 11 to 14 pound range every day I fish or tournament. I've always been able to catch the limits, it seems like. But now this time of year, and then fish start getting out there on structure, I feel like I can start to catch bigger weights, not get as many bites, but as them fish move out there on the cover, structure, rock piles, Carolina rig, you know, heavier jigs, or with the shallow water like this, get up in the bushes. Anyone have any questions on anything? Yes?
You mentioned about weighting your fluke. How do you do that?
I take a nail weight. Oh, this one doesn't have, but they make them little, Drew, do you have them up? Or,
You want me to grab some?
yeah, if you got some, it's a little, it looks like a little finish nail. They're little lead weights, and I put about 1/2 or 3/4. And you know, some people do it a different way, even on them wacky rigs. Sometimes on the wacky rigs, if a guy doesn't use any weight, people will put a little lead weight on the back because they want the worm to fall a certain way. Sometimes I'll do that on the fluke. I'll put the weight right in the very back, but most of the time I put it between the offset on the hook and where the hook comes out, and I just slide it in there. And you know, that allows me to throw it on 12-pound line on a bait caster, and the 5/0 hook adds a little weight to the rig as well to help cast it, you know. And you know, I've still been catching some fish on a fluke, but most of my fluke fish were around bedding areas. I think them fish were coming up off them deeper beds and stuff. So that to me is getting less and less each day. You know, I don't know, I'm sure there's more fish coming up. I think we're still gonna have some coming up for a few weeks. They haven't all got through spawning. But anyway, so yeah, that's what I do. I slide that. As a matter of fact, I do have the lead in there. See, it's tucked away in there so good you can't even see it.
Right at the offset, and you go to the back, right? Oh, I see it now, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, but I put it right between the hook.
Okay. So
Yeah.
it's level when you...
Yeah, sometimes, you know, people want the bottom of the bait falling, and you know, a lot of times what I'll do too is I'll take a Carolina rig swivel, a big one, and I'll tie it on the line about 1 foot to 16 inches above the hook. That does two things. That'll give me weight to cast it, plus if you're throwing it on a spinning rod, it's going to help keep the twist out of the line. Now, I don't like throwing it on a spinning rod with braid, even if it's got a monofilament, a fluorocarbon leader, because the braid doesn't sink, it floats, and I usually want the fluke to, normally how I fish a fluke or a floating worm or trick worm, is I cast it out there and let it fall out of sight. When I can't see it, I twitch it. Let it go down, you know, when I can see it, I'll twitch it, yeah. And I'll do the same with like a bubblegum worm, and I'll take that same rig and put a Senko on it sometimes too. You know, just fish a Texas rig Senko.
Have you played with the Tokyo rig?
I haven't.
I've got a bunch of them, but I haven't really thrown them. It's kind of like a wobblehead presentation.
Yeah, and they actually got them. I was just looking up there. They got them where you can flip them, and I mean, to me, it's a great concept, especially for like bed fishing, because it's got a heavy weight. You can sit there and shake the bait around. Yeah, you know, I messed around with that Jika rig, they call it, which to me was just a lot like the Tokyo rig, you know. And on the swim bait colors, you know, water's clear. I'll usually just use the shad patterns. A lot of times if it's darker or overcast, I like something with a little darker in it. If I'm up in the river in the stained waters, you'll see that chartreuse is kind of fading off there, but a lot of times I'll put a little chartreuse on the tail, and that's something too I always, not always, but most of the time, right now, if you look inside the fish's mouth or see the crawdads, there's a bunch of orange in them, and I've been putting a little orange on the tails of some of my baits. Just like on the little Ned rig, I'm catching probably more fish on this color than I am a green pumpkin. or a PBJ. And I don't know whether it's because the crawdads got so much orange in them, you know.
That Alabama Crawl, I think.
That's the bomber, yeah. And then there's a,
Orange green.
the green pumpkin orange that Z-Man makes. Works good too. And I like the elastic stretch. I mean, they last forever, you know. I mean, get a lot for your money this way. And I just take this is a 0. I just take and cut them in half. But everybody's got their own brand of, you know, Ned baits. But I really do like the elastic ones. The only thing is, if you don't fish all the time, about 5 days you'll come back, they got so much salt in them that hook will be rusted, or where you've got it hooked onto your rod keeper, it'll rust your rod keeper out. But Yamamoto baits are the same way. There's so much, you know, salt in them. I've actually ruined a few reels leaving a bait like that, putting it up against the wall and not using it for a couple months. If the trailer is salt impregnated, the salt has got into my reels just like fishing in salt water, and it's corroded my reels. So it's something to think about. Cut your trailers off, or actually a guy shouldn't put his bait right in the front of the reel like that. That's because I'm lazy. You know, it's got a little hole right there, but it's not so much that I'm lazy, it's just that when it's laying on a boat deck, it lays on the deck like that. If it's underneath on the bottom, the hooks are always down and get in my carpet, especially if I got you know, topwater bait or something with treble hooks. To me, they've got the keepers on the wrong place. And a lot of times they put the keeper right up front of the reel, which eliminates that. But then if you're trying to pop a bait to get it unstuck, seems like my line always gets in that little clip. So the next time I go to cast, it won't hardly cast. And I'll fish like that for a while with that line underneath that keeper before I figure out what the problem is. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different baits, you know. Crankbaits, I didn't talk anything about crankbaits, but it's getting in the time of year is them fish are moving out there on them ledges and drops. You know, it's time for a bigger crankbait, like a 6XD out in some of that structure. I think we're still a few weeks away from that being really good. You know, water gets up in the mid 70s, but a guy can probably crank out in front of the bushes right now as well. You know, today we caught as many fish out in front of the bushes as we did in them. Anyone got any questions on anything? Or?
How deep on the crankbait?
Right now, I mean, like a 6XD will consistently get down there on 10-pound line, 14 to 16 foot. And here I usually use 10-pound line mainly so that I can get the bait down a little bit deeper. And I always use a fluorocarbon. One is for sensitivity, and fluorocarbon supposedly absorbs water and the line sinks. Now, fluorocarbon to me, if a guy is not really good with a bait caster where he gets a lot of backlashes, I think you seriously want to use a good monofilament line. Because to me, if you backlash a few times, more than likely that line's going to break where the backlash is. Something about when you break the coating on a fluorocarbon line, it gets a real brittle. If you get rubbed raw on bushes and stuff, it's a pretty good chance it'll break there. I go to Mexico quite a bit, and I've got a buddy that I go with who's a good fisherman, but he still never learned how to cast. I've never seen a guy that backlashes as much as he does, and I've never seen a guy break off as much as he does. So finally, I put, you know, 20-pound big game on him. He fishes it for years, never changed the line, you know, and he's always got rat's nest back there pulling it out. But Sun makes a real good monofilament line. There's a lot of companies that do, but it's a lot more forgiving than fluorocarbon is. You know, especially if you're learning how to throw a bait caster, use mono on it. I use mono on all my spinning rods just because I hate the noise and I hate the memory on fluorocarbon makes on a spinning rod. My top waters, I usually use all mono because I don't want the line sinking on like a Zara spook or a redfin. I want it staying above the water. A lot of times I will use a braid, like a 30-pound braid on a whopper plopper or a buzzbait. I'm not a real big braid guy on spinning rods. Now I probably got 4 rods in my boat rigged up for my customers with like 15-pound braid and 8 or 10-pound leader. A lot of the reason I do that so I don't have to change line every week. It doesn't get all twisted up. Plus, for somebody that doesn't throw bait casters, I can give them a topwater bait or something that should have 12 or 14 pound line on it, and they can throw it on a spinning rig. Because a lot of times my customers, they can throw a bait caster, you know, fairly good, but sometimes in this clear water, you got to make really long casts. And if they go trying to do that and they're not real good with a bait caster, they're gonna, you know, have backlashes where I can tie them on that braid on a spinning rod and they can launch it, you know, just fish whatever size bait out there a long ways away.